when the servant of the man of God got up and went out early in the morning the next morning, this is verse 15, an army of horses and chariots had surrounded the city. So what did the servant do? This is what he said. "Oh, my Lord, what shall we do? What shall we do?" Anyone within the sound of my voice ask that question in the last 2 or 3 weeks? What shall we do? Lord, what shall we do? I mean, here's the truth, gang, and I made the decision this week, but mainstream media, they all have the same message. Do you know what the message is? Gloom, despair, and agony on me. Do you remember that? Some of us that are a little older, Hee Haw used to sing a song that was that very thing. Gloom, despair, and agony on me. It's the one drum they're beating. It's bad, and let me tell you just how bad it is, and let me tell you how much worse it's going to get. And what does that do to our heart? What does that do to our mind? What does it do to our spirit? I can tell you what it did to me. About Wednesday or Thursday, I just said, I can't listen to this any longer. I'm not going to. Because if we're not careful, it doesn't take very long and we can become overwhelmed with a sense of dread of what might be, of what could be, and how bad it might be. And folks, the truth is, most of the things that we worry about never happen, but it's in our nature to tend to do that. This is exactly what was happening with Elisha's servant. He woke up, he went outside, he saw the enemy was everywhere, all around him. We don't know much about this servant. We don't know what his name was, just call him servant. We don't know where he was from, we don't know his family. But there's something about this servant that's a little confusing to me. I mean, hadn't he seen what God had done through the prophet Elisha before? I mean, just earlier in this chapter, at the beginning of chapter 6 of 2 Kings, verses 1 through 7, we see Elisha made an axe head float in water. Now, anyone out there ever seen that? Raise your hand. I haven't. It says that he cut a stick and threw it into the water, into the river. He threw it in there, and it says that the axe head floated. Wow. Chapter number 5 is the story of the healing of Naaman, the commander of the army of Aram. Now, this servant had seen those things. Back to the servant. Many times we are like this servant. We can't see what's going on, or the reason that something's happening, or why certain things happen the way they do. Let me just remind you, and I want you to understand this very clearly. God sees and knows everything. Nothing is hidden from God. Nothing is hidden from Him. Hebrews chapter 4 verse 13 says this: nothing in all of creation is hidden from God's sight. Everything is uncovered and laid bare before the eyes of Him to whom we must give an account. No matter what we're going through, God sees and God knows it. Now, that's a double-edged sword. You do realize that, right? God sees our circumstances. He sees what we're going through, but He also sees the things that many times people try to hide from others, thinking that they won't know that or they won't find out about that. But let me read to you a couple of things and remind you. Matthew chapter 10 and verse 29, this speaks of what God knows and God sees. What is the price of 2 sparrows? 1 copper coin? But not a single sparrow can fall to the ground without your Father knowing it. And let me remind you, just the opposite of that is true. There is nothing that is hidden from Him. How many times have people thought that they could hide things from others, that they could somehow get away with something bad? Jeremiah chapter 17, verse 10. Jeremiah 17:10 says, I, the Lord, search the heart and examine the mind to reward each person according to what their conduct, according to their conduct, according to what their deeds deserve. Folks, we can't hide our plans from God if they're not godly. We can't get away with anything when it comes to God. God sees all and God knows all. Now, back to the story of Elisha and his servant. The servant had seen God work before. He had seen the miracles. It makes me wonder, why was he so fearful? Let me ask you this question this morning, Christian. Have you ever been discouraged? Not knowing what to do? What is coming next? Maybe asking God, are you out there? Do you see what I'm going through? If we're honest, we've all been there at one time or another. Maybe not for long, but we've all been there. What does Elisha say? Let me tell you what he didn't say. What Elisha didn't say is, quit whining like a baby. He didn't say, suck it up. He didn't say, quit crying, or I'll give you something to cry about. He didn't say, get over it. What did he say? Verse 16, don't be afraid. We need to hear those words, folks. We as humans need to hear those words. It made me wonder, how many times do we read that in Scripture, don't be afraid or don't be fearful? How many times? I looked it up. You guys could Google it and probably answer this before I tell you. 365 times. 365 different ways every day of the year God is saying to us, do not be afraid. Don't be fearful. We need to be reminded of this often. We're human. We get tired. We get caught off guard. Sometimes we get blindsided, maybe even by a friend. There have been times when we thought we were ready for what was coming, and we weren't. We tend to be fearful. Why does God remind us often, don't be afraid? Why does he tell us not to be afraid? Verse number 16 tells us the answer. And Elisha said to the servant, those who are with us are more than those who are with them.